Former Senator John Edwards is running for the Democratic presidential nomination. Today he's delivering a major speech at the Council on Foreign Relations on what he would do in Iraq and elsewhere. Senator, good to have you in the studio. Good morning.
Glad to be with you, Matt.
David calls it a compromise, whatever we call it. Let's talk about this deal that was struck in Congress. Basically, the supplemental funding bill has 18 benchmarks the Iraqis have to hit on political progress, security, economic progress, reports from the White House to Congress July 15th, September 15th, but, and this is a big but, the headline here is no deadline for U.S. troops. Why did the Democrats cave in?
Well, the Democrats should be standing their ground. I mean, the American people said very clearly in the last election that they wanted to see a different course in Iraq. They sent a mandate by putting the Democrats in charge of the Congress, and it's very clear that George Bush has no intention to compromise. And what the Democrats need to do is just strong, stand their ground, and continue.
Why did they cave in then?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that what the American people wanted them to do was stand their ground, force this president to start withdrawing troops from Iraq, and continue to submit bills to him with a timetable for withdrawal.
Is it possible, Senator, this is all about the Democrats' fear that they'll be seen as unpatriotic and not supporting the troops?
This should not be about politics at all, Matt. I mean, we have men and women dying in Iraq. I was listening to your newscast just a few minutes ago. This is about life and death. This is about war. We have families who are sending young men and women over there to put their lives on the line. We need to stand our ground.
Here's what you said recently. We need to stand our ground against this president. You can't negotiate with him. Congress should send the same bill back to him again and again, and you're talking about that deadline-inclusive bill, until he realizes he has no choice but to start bringing our troops home. The funding power is the only way Congress can force Bush to end the war. If Congress gives him yet another blank check to fund the war, we're going to get what we get every time before, another year of war. Is this a case in point?
It is. I mean, the Congress needs to stand the ground against this president and force a change in policy. George Bush has shown over and over again that he's stubborn, that he's bullheaded, that he doesn't think he can do anything wrong. He will not change unless the Congress forces them to do it, and they need to force him to do it.
You're going to talk about your plan before the Council on Foreign Relations today, and your plan includes 40 to 50,000 U.S. troops coming out immediately, the rest of the troops out by the end of the year. And the critics say, and there are critics of not only your plan but similar plans, say that as the U.S. troops leave, you're going to hear a giant sucking sound, and that's going to be a vacuum. And it's going to be created, and the violence that we see now is going to get larger and fill that vacuum, and it could spill out throughout the region. How do you say you're right and they're wrong?
Well, all of this doesn't depend on us. It depends on the Iraqis. It depends on what the Sunni and the Shia leadership do. If they can reach some political reconciliation,
which they have,
they have not, that will help squelch the violence. And the question is, how do we shift the responsibility to them to reach a political solution?
But you have to figure that just by our presence, we are stopping. We're doing a bad job there in terms of stopping sectarian violence. But just by our presence, we must be stopping some. So if we take our troops out, who's responsible for stopping that violence? The Iraqi troops?
Yeah, the Iraqis themselves. I mean, we have to shift the pressure to them, Matt. That's what has not happened. They don't feel the heat. They're not reaching a political solution. And can I just add, as we start to pull our combat troops out of Iraq, we do need to maintain a presence in the region. I mean, we're going to need to keep troops in Kuwait. We need a naval presence in the Persian Gulf.
This is the issue of the campaign right now, let's face it. And I'm not trying to hand out gold stars and take gold stars away here. But why shouldn't a Senator Barack Obama be able to look at you and Senator Clinton and say, look, when this was first discussed in 2002, I wasn't in the Senate, but I spoke out against it. Senator Edwards voted for authorization. Senator Clinton voted for authorization. So on this issue of paramount importance, I had the best judgment.
Well, I think the answer to that is I've said very clearly that I think my vote was wrong. I've taken responsibility for it. I hope that it indicates something about how I would lead as President of the United States, openly, honestly, so that the American people know when I believe I've made a mistake and change course. All of us are human. We've never had a president who wasn't. We're never going to have one who isn't. And we need to be able to have a president who will be honest and open with the country.
Another subject. There seems to be a bit of a growing PR problem in your campaign, and it's this idea of two Americas, the haves and the have-nots, and a candidate who is clearly a have, who has multi-million-dollar residences, who's worked for as an advisor to a hedge fund and received about $500,000 in payments, received a $40,000 honorarium or payment from a public university for sharing ideas on poverty, the haircut we've all heard about. So how are you going to change this perception that you aren't just a rich guy talking about poverty?
Well, Matt, I am a have. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it's not where I come from. I come from being a have-not, but I've been lucky in my life, and I'm a have now. And if you look at what I've spent my life doing, just since the last election, I mean, I've helped raise the minimum wage in 6 states, helped organize workers into unions all over this country, started a college program for kids who otherwise couldn't go to college. I've been all over the world doing humanitarian
So
work.
you're saying you can relate.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think the American people will see that. They're going to look at me, they're going to judge me as a human being, whether I have the characteristics, integrity, honesty, openness to be President of the United States, and whether the specific things I want to do on issues like the war in Iraq make sense to them.
How's Mrs. Edwards feeling?
She's actually doing very well. Thanks for asking.
Good. It's nice to have you in the studio, and you're giving a speech again, as I said, a little later this afternoon here in New York.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Senator.